Hi, welcome to Coffee with Carrie, where we are finding faith and hope in unexpected journeys. Today, I have guest Tara Wicker. She's a wife, a mother of 6, and she is the co-director of Pro-Black, Pro-Life. Welcome, Tara.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm excited to be here, Carrie, with you on Coffee with Carrie. Really excited to have this conversation today. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Can we start by you sharing a little bit about you and your family and what a typical day looks like for you right now?
Wow. Okay. Sure. So I'm Tara Wicker. I am married to my high school sweetheart, Mike Wicker. We are in ministry together. We pastor Lighthouse Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We have 6 amazing children. Our oldest is 29 and our baby is 11. And then we just became grandparents of a 3-month-old now, our first grandson.
Congratulations.
Affectionately called Bubby, but Michael Joel the third. So really excited. Typical day is, as you can imagine, with 6 children, a grandchild, and an amazing, I call her my daughter-in-law, Malia. Never a dull moment, but everybody's engaged and involved in ministry. We have a bonus child. He's 23 years old, Dexter Paul, that we kind of unofficially adopted into our family as well. So lots of excitement, lots of things going on. We're all over the place, and the kids are all involved as well.
That is awesome. Awesome. Well, I know that you have been involved in ministry for many years. Can you share when you felt called?
Sure. So, again, we grew up at Bethany World Prayer Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So been in church, my entire life. My husband and I met when we were teenagers. He tells the story that he came to church to follow his girlfriend to church, and God ended up arresting him in the process. We started out in what was called cell ministry, and we started leading couples groups and things of that sort, and understanding and hearing about the pro-life ministry, but never had really been actively involved, kind of like a lot of church folk that we're finding. We were kind of indifferent about it, knew about it, heard about it, but really was not actively engaged. And at 16 years old, found ourselves in the house alone together by ourselves. Ended up, things escalated. First time I ever had sex in my life, I ended up getting pregnant. And that kind of started a path and a journey, which didn't know back then, because 30 years of silence, literally, and we can talk a little bit about that as we get through it, ended up resulting in what transformed our lives, and now allowing God to take what was a real mess and turn it into a ministry, if I can say that.
Amen. Yeah.
So I guess feeling called, particularly in this area, was not anything that was planned. Again, I had no thought or conversation about what had happened when I was 16 years old, and I had gotten kind of okay with that, dealt with it in my own way, was healed in that space, and was just kind of moving forward. And God had a whole other plan. So if you know my husband, he's a strapping former military officer, former state trooper, football guy, never sick at all. And there was a young man named Jonathan Barton who was at that time the associate director for Louisiana Black Advocates for Life. And he called me. I was actually serving on the Baton Rouge City Council as a councilwoman. And he said, listen, I'm having this meeting with pastors. I'd love to hold it at your community center, and wanted to see if your husband was available to come. And so we ended up having a little meeting, and it was at that meeting, Jonathan walked in and he had a verse of scripture from the Word of God that really I had known and heard, but really hadn't thought about. And it was sitting, I remember very vividly, it was sitting on my table, and it was Proverbs 31, 8-9. And it says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. And for whatever reason, those words resonated with me. At that time, I was a city council person, and I always thought, okay, well, that's my, that was my call. I knew when I was about 25 that God had called me to speak for those that couldn't speak for themselves. And when I got into politics, I thought that that was what he meant by that. I'm speaking up, I'm helping people, and God had a whole other plan. So he ended up calling one day and saying, I'd like your husband to come to a meeting. We're having a luncheon for pastors. Could he come? Mike's never sick. And this particular day, he was flat on his back, could not get out of the bed, sick. And I said, Jonathan, I'm so sorry. He's not able to be there. He's sick. And true story, Jonathan tells the story that he hung the phone up and said, okay, I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you so much. And the Lord arrested him and said, she's an elected official, call her and invite her to the meeting. And he's like, she's busy. I'm not going to do that. He says that he picked up the phone and hung it up 4 times. On the last time, God would not leave him alone. He said, I said, call her. He called, I answered the phone. And he said, well, could you please, would you like to come? And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, sure, I'll come. And full disclosure, I was going to do the political thing, and I said I'm going to get to the back of the room, and I ended up showing up at this meeting. The young man called me up to speak, and at that moment, my life changed. So in front of 30 strangers, for the first time in 30 years, I was sharing my story about what happened to me when I was 16 years old.
Wow.
And that sparked this trajectory of being involved in this movement.
I just think it's amazing how God calls us, even when we aren't looking for it, right? And we have absolutely no aspirations or expectations. If you feel comfortable, I know you've shared at different pro-life events. Can you share more about that experience as a teenager and what you did, share your heart that day?
Sure. So, like I said, ended up getting pregnant at 16 years old, not knowing that there had been sort of this unspoken history, even with the women in my family, of abortions. And before I knew it, not even having a real conversation, my mom kind of asked me what did I want to do? And Mike, who's now my husband, my boyfriend at the time, we had kind of had this disagreement, and I remember just really being upset, hadn't talked to him for about a week or so. And through that process, I found out that I was pregnant. And when I told him that I was pregnant, he said, okay, I'm going to quit football. He was an aspiring on his way to play college ball at some point. And he said, okay, I'm going to quit football and I'm going to get a job. And I remember when he told me that, my heart just sunk to my stomach. And I remember feeling like, I've ruined my life. I've ruined his life. What am I going to do? And so in the midst of all of that, some turmoil happened. We were in a disagreement. My mom and I really didn't have much of a conversation. I just remember crying. And she said, don't worry about it. We're going to take care of it. And I remember this process of just being very, very numb. And I remember her driving me to the abortion clinic. She made the appointment, the whole nine, driving me to the abortion clinic. And there was nobody there that day. No one was in the parking lot. There was no one saying, hey, you're about to make the worst mistake of your life. And went in, had the abortion. And I remember laying on this table afterwards, and I was in the room by myself, laying on that table. And I remember looking to my right, and there was my baby in a glass jar. And for me, that was the most transformative moment, because I looked over, and through my tears, the only words that I could muster is, Mommy, sorry. So I knew that I had made the worst mistake, the worst decision of my life, and I also knew that I was a mom. And interestingly enough, the same doctor that performed the abortion was the same doctor that actually delivered me as a baby.
Wow.
And in Louisiana, the doctors are required to sign your birth certificate. And some reason I was looking at my birth certificate one day, and I knew the doctor that had performed the abortion, and I looked at my birth certificate, and it was the exact same doctor. So, that led me through 30 years of silence. I didn't even tell my best friend. I told no one. I didn't talk about it. Mike and I never talked about it again. until we were asked to do a video with Men for Life. TJ Burgess with Louisiana Right to Life asked us to just tell our story. And we didn't know, we had never talked about it. And so there's a video that's out there now, and it's real because that was the first time in 30 years that Mike and I ever had that conversation. And so they recorded that, and now it's gone all over the country, but that's our real story.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I know that transparency is unique for this specific unexpected journey. I myself is post-abortive. And so what I've found that hearing other people sharing their story has, helped me feel the bravery of coming out and sharing my story. And so for you being able to say what you're saying now, I know it's going to bless other women that might still be holding that in secrecy.
I've had so many women that have come to me after I spoke and said, I've been suffering with this for years. I've had pastors' wives to come tell me that. I've never been able to share this with anyone. And thank you so much for sharing your story, because now it's helped me find my voice.
Yeah. So I know that you are the co-director of Pro-Black, Pro-Life, but you also spoke a little bit about the council you sit on. Can you share more about all of the ways that you and your husband serve in the pro-life sector?
Sure. So we are co-directors of Pro-Black, Pro-Life. We're also co-directors for Louisiana Black Advocates for Life and National Black Advocates for Life. So we intentionally are in different arenas because, we found, Carrie, that the message, depending on who you're talking to and what audience and the what you're trying to accomplish, that message sometimes is a different message. And so we are intentional about being in every community, especially communities of color, where this is, abortion rates are the highest in the communities of color, but it's also the least talked about in those communities. So we intentionally go into hard places. I'll never forget, through Pro-Black, Pro-Life, we're in the middle of an HBCU tour. So we go to all of the historically Black colleges and universities. And this last one we were at in Alcorn, and there was a lady there that was just there she was the caterer, and one of the caterers. And after our presentation to the students, she sends a message back. She's in tears crying. She said, for the first time in my life, because of the ministry time that y'all had, I was able to face the abortions that I had in 2015 and 2016. So I think it's those kind of moments that allow us the opportunity to operate in whatever space that there is. You never know who's in those rooms that really need to be healed and need to be heard.
Absolutely. So when you guys are on these campuses, is there a certain curriculum you use? In what ways do you guys spread awareness of the sanctity of life to these college students?
Sure. So, young people, you can't just walk in and kind of, say whatever and think that you got to be engaging. Yeah. So we do a lot of engaging activities. We start with, we have these babies, real life well, they're not real life, but they look like real life babies, and they're different sizes and different age. And so we play a game with them for them to actually guess the age of that baby. And this is a baby in the womb. And so we start with that, and it's really engaging. But we use Ma'afa 21, which is a documentary that's been out for years that kind of tells the whole story about the impact of eugenics on the Black community, kind of how all of this movement started. And so we take excerpts from that, because that video itself, but it's an excellent resource for us. The entire video on YouTube is about 2 hours and 36 minutes, so we can't do that. Yeah. But we pull the relative components from there as conversation starters to say, hey, were you even aware of how Planned Parenthood got started and the history behind all of that and the impact that this is actually having on your community? And so to see the light bulb go off in these kids' eyes to say, no one ever told us this, is really kind of what motivates us to keep having these conversations. But we utilize that. We do something called a Black Life Symposium, where we also use the same excerpts, but have real life conversations with pastors and congregations about this issue as well.
Yeah. I know that there's other films in addition to that, and different resources that I'd love, for you to speak into. And I think of things like the most recent Project 1916 by White Rose Resistance, and and a deep dive into the history and the origin of that. When you and I spoke briefly, you had mentioned words such as predatory businesses in the Black community. I would love for you, if you can, to share with our listeners, as if they have no history of understanding the connection of abortion and abortion clinics, eugenics, to the Black and brown community. Can you speak into that?
Sure. So, just in regards to the history, if you look at, Planned Parenthood, they're in all 50 states, and in all 50 states, they're located in Black and brown communities. We know that that is very intentional with the history of Margaret Sanger, who ultimately was the pioneer and the founder of Planned Parenthood, and just the history of the strategic and methodical intentions of being able to target sectors of a community that the elitists felt were inferior and were not necessarily needed, were a burden and a drain on the government. And, because of those individuals is why our country is suffering. And so there was a very intentional period of time of being able to annihilate those individuals. And it was very systematic. It was very horrible is the only word that I can think of.
Absolutely.
But it's impacted Black communities across the country. And so to a point that now when you look at abortion and you look at the replacement rate for African Americans, it's 1.4. And so at that point, that it's virtually impossible. Your race, your sector of people is on a steady decline where you are killing more of your babies than are being born, then you're being annihilated. And so it's been perpetuated in a way that now the intention doesn't have to be that broad, because now the community is kind of perpetuating in itself. We've bought into the idea that abortion is health care. We've bought into the fact that there are disparities. And so because of the fact that I have economic issues or I'm not able to, babies are now a matter of an inconvenience, that it's okay for me to kill my baby. Not even having the thought of this was put into the communities intentionally with the idea of your population being annihilated. And so I think when we bring the truth to that conversation, and it's interesting because we don't go there from the beginning. We kind of allow the documentary to tell the history and the story about eugenics and how it actually got into the Black community. We talk about birth control, all of those things. And then at the end, we talk about, now this is what's really happening. And people are like, wow, I had no idea this was going on. So when you think about that in totality and you look at the holistic aspect of things that are done to African American communities, that's one of those things that we know are intentionally located there, and it's hiding behind, oh, it's just quality health care. And because you don't have access to quality health care, you should come here, when in fact you go there and they're encouraging you to birth your babies.
Yeah. And what's so interesting is that's the history and that's the truth. However, what we see is historically the Black community leans more pro-choice. Can you explain why that is the case?
It's interesting because the intersection between those kinds of strategies and methods was interesting, because in the 60s, that was not the case in the Black communities. Black people were not having abortions in droves, but you could actually draw a direct line to the onset of abortions and Roe versus Wade and all of those kinds of things in terms of the impact of what has happened in the decline of the Black communities. And so when that came up, and the unfortunate thing now is what's happening is all couched as a political issue. And because we have not dealt with the ills of the urban communities and the disparities and the health inequities and all the things that go into it, all of this is now a strategy to let's collapse that into your rights. So, and I tell people all the time, especially in Black communities, I say, at what point in time, the African American community has always been a very resilient community, especially in our country, because we've always had to overcome challenges that other races simply did not have to face. And so that's part of our history and our culture as a people, of being able to overcome challenges and succeed. Yeah. And so when we are having these conversations in our communities, I say, well, at what point in time did it become better to be dead than poor? And so, we're having those kind of real, dialogues. And so there's a conversation now, especially with the younger generation, because for whatever reason, this conversation has been couched in, these are my rights. So literally we go back and we have a real conversation about the 14th Amendment. And, did you realize that at one point in time, what happened in our history as a country, and there were a group of individuals that really felt like your life was not valued and that you weren't even considered a person. Mm-hmm. So we had this whole conversation of background and education to why you need to be able to understand that the value of life in the Black community is something that you need to be concerned about, because others have been historically concerned with making sure that your life is not valued. And so we have to tear down a lot of the myths. We found that the abortion industry, of course, is all about economics. And sometimes they're squeezed on both sides. So we know that Planned Parenthood, who gets billions and billions of dollars to bring abortion into the Black community, are paid handsomely to do that and to, perpetuate that whole diabolical scheme. And then on the other side, you have these issues of healthcare inequities and all of the disparities in the community, that the community feel like they're just sandwiched in between who's making money out of our communities now, but at the end of the day, we never get the opportunity to benefit from any of it. And that's sad.
Yeah. Some churches, some Black churches are pro-life on the pulpit, but we don't find, as a pregnancy center and pregnancy centers nationally, as much involvement. Why do you think that gap exists?
I think the gap exists, for one, you have a lot of healing that needs to happen in the Black community, even in the Black churches, because we know that there are young ladies that are in those pews that are post-abortive and may not feel supportive. But also what we found, and the reason why we do these Love Life luncheons and we talk to pastors, is they are struggling with how to have that conversation without being offensive. And some, even we found that we have to help pastors that have either participated or been a part of or, kind of looked the other way. And so they're having to also deal with their own guilt. Yeah. So because it's widespread a lot of times in the Black communities, we're having to go in and have some healing conversations first to say, let's deal with this. In our communities, a lot of times way back in the day, when someone would even get cancer, if someone in the family got cancer, it was whispered, like, oh, they have cancer. It was not something that was really talked about. And so that's been kind of part of that history and tradition, that we know it's there, we know it exists, but we're going to brush it under the rug like it really doesn't. And that unfortunately got into the church. But you got to also remember, the Black church especially has always been the place where ideally the civil rights movement, whatever was done, when families would bring, especially in Louisiana, when families would bring their children to school in Louisiana, they would take them to the church to say, hey, my baby's here. They're going to need a family while they're here. So that was the core of the whole community. But also, unfortunately, that was also the core of politics. And so if you wanted to know who to vote for and how to function, the Black church was actively involved. And so in this space, because this has become such a political issue, and now it's also become such an economic issue, you find that conversation in the Black church, in the pulpit, is now aligned with political issues as opposed to biblical issues. And we should stand up for what's right, and God is pro-life. And so we're having conversations with pastors that I'm thinking are going to be part of the movement. This is easy because we all know what the Bible says. Mm-hmm. And we're having to have basic one-on-one conversations about what the Bible is saying about life. It's been a challenge.
Wow, yeah. I know that we've had experiences where we have local Black churches that are involved in fundraisers, especially in leadership. But then when we speak and try to encourage volunteers from their congregants, they're very willing to be helpful and to serve, but they preface it with, I'm pro-choice, right? And so there's been this difficulty of bringing in more of the Black community, not only in being represented better in the pregnancy centers that are within the same community, but even with staff and volunteers. So for those that are listening that are directors of pregnancy centers, what would be something that you could say that could help try to make sure that they're better served and in all aspects, like I said, whether it be their client, the volunteer, or staffs, that we have more diversity within our pregnancy centers?
Yeah, I think trust is a big thing.
Yeah.
In the Black community especially, I used to be a community organizer, and I remember going into certain neighborhoods that we were talking about urban revitalization at that time. And it was difficult, even for me as a young African-American. I was coming out of college at the time, going into those neighborhoods because they had been promised so many things. And, everyone would come with the newest and latest and greatest idea about how we're going to transform your community. And somebody else's pockets were always padded and the neighborhood always looked the same. And so the trust factor was always an issue of how do you go in and you actually build trust. And I think part of that is building very real relationships. It's less about, my favorite quote is, hey, if you came to help me, don't waste your time. But if your liberation is tied into my liberation, come, let's work together. And so for me, I think it has to be an attitude of understanding that it's not about going in to, help this little poor community that needs our help, but how do we come together? Because at the end of the day, this impacts all of us, and actually treat those communities like they're equal partners.
Amen.
So I have some major industries that we work with as well. And one of the things that corporations often fail in is they go in and they really think that they know what's best for that neighborhood. I'm like, well, did you ask them? So, if you're able to go in and actually have real, valid, solid, same level conversations with people that are have the same, desires, but just haven't had the same access, then that conversation becomes a different conversation. So I think it's harder work because we're used to going in and just providing money or providing a service or bringing in volunteers or doing whatever. And the reality of it is that really what that community needs, right? And so in this space, we've got to be able to back up and figure out. One of my frustrations is dealing with the issue, but not dealing with how we got to that issue. And so one of my favorite things is we love pulling the babies out of the river. I'm going to pull the baby out of the river. And the story is the guy left and they're like, where are you going? I'm going up to the top of the river to figure out where's the giant that's throwing the babies in the river. I think we've got to be able to deal with the giants in those communities. And that's harder work. That's getting into your space. That's understanding how did you even get here. And most folk and most organizations are not equipped or really ready, Carrie, to have that conversation. So they get comfortable just pulling the babies out of the river instead of dealing with the giant that's chunking them in the first place.
Yeah, that's so good. I know with social work and the helping profession and pregnancy centers, I think that what you said there a moment ago is so poignant, which is if you're going to go and serve a community, it needs to be to serve, right? And in a humble, non-pretentious way that you're coming to get information and to gather and find out what they need and what they're wanting instead of telling them what you think they need and what they needed. So, number one, it's the stance and the posture of when these centers and go out there and try to create relationship. So let's say that there is someone within pregnancy centers that is really wanting to get connected and bring in a better representation of the community and have zero education and zero history of understanding what's up that river. Are there certain books, resources, you spoke about a documentary, where would you lead someone to just start learning?
Yeah, and I think in that space, part of the process is to be okay having uncomfortable conversations. And so I think that if you're okay with having uncomfortable conversations, then that at least gets your foot in the door. And I think also being genuine and intentional about why am I here? Because that's always a question. And it may not be a question that those individuals will have while they're there receiving the resources. But if I know that you're here to help me so that I can get out of this situation and I'm not just here, and I'll use something as simple as, we have what's called My Baby's Closet. And so we do, intentional giving of diapers and wipes and formula and things of that sort. It's one thing for me to just make sure that your baby has diapers for this next month. It's another thing to make sure that you have the ability to provide diapers for yourself and for your baby for the rest of that baby's life, or as long as that baby needs it. And so I think going back to digging down, as opposed to trying to figure out how to communicate with that community, I think going back and figuring out, why am I here? Like, when you're able to establish what is your why, and then translate that to the community that says, hey, you're not just here to help me one time, but you're here to really make sure that the trajectory of my life is different, that becomes a different conversation. Because we have 150 million help organizations. But if you're talking about, and I don't want to confuse that to say that emergency help or that I'm in need and I need access to that service is not needed, but long term, there should be some goal of working yourself out of being needed, is my point. And I find that sometimes organizations will get just to the point and then be okay. But if you're trying to work in that community, I think that their resources are, you need to be educated about why that community is there. So again, my go-to is for folk that don't know, or the Mod for 21. Watch that program so you'll know kind of exactly what the history is and watch it in its entirety. I think that you can also go in and there's a ton of interviews that we even have on the website in terms of, I'm pro-Black and I'm pro-life, I'm Black. Let me tell you why. We utilize something for our pastors where we have a pastor's playbook. And every June, in celebration of the overturn of Roe versus Wade, we actually do an event, particularly for pastors and their congregations, to say, this is how you preach a pro-life message. This is how you actually have that communication and that connection. So for us, the goal is having churches equipped so that even if there is a pregnancy resource center that's there, that's next to a community college or that's next to a church, they have that relationship to kind of guide through to say, hey, this is an organization that's trusted. They're here and their why is the real why. But I think you can't overstep building those really organic, transparent, and real relationships.
Yeah. This is also so very good. As we wind down, I have a couple more questions for you.
Okay.
Going back just for a moment, can you share your healing process to the abortion that you had, and what that looked like, and how your faith was a part of that journey?
I think for me, it was walking up to that podium in Drusilla's restaurant in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, back in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, really, and seeing my heart start to beat out of my chest like this. And I looked down and I couldn't figure out why I was nervous, because I had spoken in front of countless people and was never nervous. And I walked up there, and as I'm walking up there and I'm hearing the voice of the Holy Spirit saying, I want you to share what happened to you when you were 16. For me, that was the moment that started my healing process. I didn't even realize that I wasn't healed, Carrie. I didn't know. I just hadn't thought about it. I had put it on the shelf and I was good, and I had my life and I had my kids and we were rolling. And that moment pulled back a scab that I didn't even know was there in my life. And so for me to be able to share at that moment my story and what happened literally opened the door. I'll never forget, right after that, I was invited to be the guest speaker for the Baton Rouge Life March, the Louisiana Right to Life. And so for the first time, I went from a room of about 30 people sharing what happened to about several thousand people on a field in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, sharing my story for the first time. So I think for me, the healing process has been, like you mentioned earlier, having the confidence and the ability to, as horrible as the situation was, being able to share that experience and tell my story, and then see other ladies come to me and say, thank you so much. I needed that because I didn't know the way to share. And I think that's been the really healing process for me. I often think that if there was one person on that parking lot that day that would have knocked on my window, or if there was one sign that would have said, hey, you're about to murder your baby, you're about to make the worst mistake of your life, I oftentimes think I would be holding my kid, my baby would be here today. So me telling people, never underestimate the power of your voice, never underestimate the power of your presence, and being confident in telling your story. If I can do that and save a baby and save a woman's life, then all the hell that I went through was worth it.
Absolutely. Tara, you have poured so much wisdom and understanding into this conversation. What's the one thing that you want to leave the listener knowing?
Wow. That God is amazing, and that there is redemption through his power on the other side of a tragic situation, and that even if you've made a bad decision, that there's healing on the other side. And for those of us that are on the service side, I would say the intentionality of being there and educating the communities that you're serving in a real, very genuine, heartfelt way, as with the heart of God, is paramount in the delivery of the services that we're giving. And I think just please stay the course. Don't give up the fight. Use the starfish analogy. You may not be changing the entire world, but that one lady that you saved that baby and her life is that one starfish that was thrown back into the ocean, and that life was saved.
Mm-hmm. Thank you again so much for being here. I'm so blessed by this conversation.
Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to have coffee with Carrie. It's been a beautiful and an awesome morning. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that it's called you to action, called you to seek healing, and most importantly, called you closer to the heart of the Father. If you want to learn more about today's guest, we'll have their links in our bio. Until next time, God bless and take care.